When you think of Alexander Hamilton, what comes to mind? The $10 bill? Federalist? The first Secretary of Treasury? What about slavery? Yeah, slavery. As a young, handsome man, he was just trying to get his name out there. What he didn't know was that the stand he was taking for slavery would end up abolishing it in less than 100 years. If you really think about it, Hamilton was the first one to really stand up for slavery. The exact year when Alexander Hamilton was born is a heavy debate between January 11th, 1755 or 1757. Whatever the year, Hamilton spent his early childhood on the beautiful island of Nevis in the British West Indies. Growing up, our founding father lived a tough life. At the age of 10, his father, James A. Hamilton, left the family in poverty, forcing his single mother, Rachel Buck, to take care of two toddler-aged growing boys. Then, just a year later, Alexander's mother died of a fever. By the time young Hamilton was a teenager, he was an orphan, living on his own. Soon afterwards, Hamilton picked up a job at the trading firm called Beekman and Carew Company, where he worked mainly supervising the money and paperwork for the African slave trading company. Though throughout his work, he never directly worked with the slave transfer of the business, he did see the slaves' poor lives come to his island and later wrote, "The slaves were very indifferent, indeed sickly and thin." Although Hamilton worked in a slavery system, he seemed to dislike it, and this was the starting point of his fight against slavery. Later in life, when Hamilton was 15 years old, a hurricane came and destroyed his town. A few weeks later, Hamilton wrote a beautifully written letter describing the terror of the hurricane, saying, "Good God, what horror and destruction! It's impossible for me to describe or you to form any idea of it." Little did he know it, but one of the worst things that could possibly happen to him turned into the best. His letter later made the newspaper, and when people read it, they began to raise money to help the young man and send him off to North America. So, Alexander Hamilton basically wrote his way out of the tough times. When Hamilton made his way into New York, he attended King's College, which is now known as Columbia University. There was where he began to study the practice of law. A few years later, he met John Lawrence, who soon became one of Hamilton's most loved friends. The love was so deep that many wonder if the two men were more than just friends, given evidence when Hamilton once wrote to Mr. Lawrence and said, "I wish, my dear Lawrence, it might be in my power, by action rather than words, to convince you that I love you." 2 generations later, Hamilton's grandson later wrote, "There is a note of romance in their friendship, quite unusual even in those days." Sharing the same interests on many different topics, yet most of all, slavery. Hamilton once praised Lawrence, saying, "They could not be in better hands than of Mr. Lawrence," talking about the slaves. As Alexander Hamilton grew up in the city of New York, he soon learned that the slavery that melted his heart in the West Indies was disappointingly the same in the big city. Yet, that wasn't going to stop him from taking a stand and trying to end slavery. In 1774, he wrote, "All men have one common original. They participate in one common nature, and consequently have one common right." He also argued that there was no good reason that one man should exercise any power over his fellow creatures, meaning in the sense of slavery. Even at the young age of 17, living on his own in a new country, Hamilton was already beginning to take a stand. In a letter to John Jay, he demanded that it is best for slaves to be enlisted as soldiers. He believes this because the Negroes acquire from a life of servitude and should sooner become soldiers than our white inhabitants. What Hamilton is saying about the white inhabitants is he is basically putting himself and his fellow friends out there, saying that even African Americans would make better soldiers than himself. What an incredible way to take a stand for the slaves, and also the phenomenal act of humility when he puts others in front of himself. So it's just what a great guy this man is. Once, in a letter to Henry Lawrence, father of John Lawrence, Hamilton expressed his thoughts about a slave by the name of Frederick, who pretended to carry arms and acted in the trenches. He was caught and later found in the jail of New York. Yet, Hamilton defends the slave, saying, "He was always a very good lad, before the war, meaning before his mistakes. He goes on to say that if he is to be freed, let him be a slave to no other man, meaning that the protective Hamilton doesn't want those awful slaveholders mistreating Frederick. He knows Mr. Frederick is a good man that doesn't deserve a painful whipping every single day. Alexander Hamilton got so into slaves' rights while writing to Henry Lawrence, he forgot about Frederick. Getting so in depth with slaves and the possibility of freeing them, he said, "I see the rising gradations to unlimited freedom and view the prospect with pleasure. When we shall be wise enough to stop importation, importing, trading, and selling slaves, such happy families will become more general, and time will work manumission. We shall then ensure good servants, good soldiers, our strength in time of need." Hamilton really expresses what he thinks the future will hold and believes that patience is a virtue in freeing of slaves. And he knows that one day slaves will be used to the best of their abilities, whether that be servants, soldiers, or any other need. Not only did Alexander Hamilton take a stand for slaves, he truly wanted them to be protected from any harm and honestly respected them. Although he owned slaves, he was never the stereotypical slave master that you see in pictures from back in the day. He was a caring, loving man who respected his slaves and the work they did for him. He once wrote, "To all of them I offer every proper indulgence. They are my watchmen and my friends. Never was an absolute monarch more happy in his subject than at present time I am." Biographer Forrest MacDonald, who wrote Alexander Hamilton, a biography, once said he, meaning Hamilton, advocated one of the most daring invasions of property rights that was ever made, the abolition of Negro slavery. Yet, Alexander Hamilton stood for something more than just ending slavery. He stood to protect slaves. He took a stand to make sure that slaves were treated the way they deserved to be treated. In 1785, he committed to do the right thing by standing up for slaves, saying, "How long this will continue is uncertain, but I will endeavor to do right today." Although Hamilton never lived to see the abolishment of slavery, he affected the whole world with his quill and his beautiful writings as he did his best, taking a stand against slavery.
Alexander Hamilton!